support tonight.
Chris Stevens.
Well, thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's a pleasure to follow the honourable member for West Aberdeenshire and Kincardine, who's going to prove the point for me that I had come to when I was listening to the Minister and putting together my remarks for this debate, because politics is a mixture of rhetoric and reality. And it was 2 years ago, at that very dispatch box, that the former Chancellor George Osborne had announced that austerity was over. And now the current Chancellor tells us that austerity is coming to an end. And we have heard the rhetoric of the last 2 weeks, Madam Deputy Speaker, that has led me to conclude that many honourable members opposite are modern-day war leggings. Because they remind me of the scene. They remind me of the scene of Captain Poldark, who no doubt is viewed by some members opposite as some sort of Marxist-Leninist. But Captain Poldark asks the landowners to cut the price of grain, and it was George Warlegan. It was George Warlegan who said, well, if I cut the price of grain, then my profits will decrease. And if my profits will decrease, then I won't have enough money to give provision for the poor. And there it is, Madam Deputy Speaker, modern-day conservatism found in a period drama. Because the reality is, Madam Deputy Speaker, that this budget and this finance bill, by any measure, benefits the rich on the backs of the very poor. Because it was the Resolution Foundation has told us in their research that those in the bottom 30% of income distribution will, on average, gain less from the work allowance and income tax changes than they will lose out from the benefits freeze. Indeed, a low-income family with children will lose £210 next year as a result of that benefit freeze. And let's discuss universal credit, Madam Deputy Speaker, and the social security system which is broken in this country. Because the money announced for the universal credit changes are mainly to do with managed migration. 2 weeks ago, Madam Deputy Speaker, the Social Security Committee in the Scottish Parliament heard evidence from the Crookston Community Group in my constituency, who gave evidence that an 8-year-old boy in my constituency was stopped by a teacher and asked why he was taking so many tomato ketchup sachets. And his answer to his teacher was so he could take them home and put them in boiling water to make soup for him and his family. Madam Deputy Speaker, that makes me want to weep. But it's not a special case, Madam Deputy Speaker, as Suzanne McGlone of the Crookston Community Group said, that while this incident would shock most people, it is actually the lower end of the scale. And that is the reality of the current social security system. But as well as cuts, the litany of evidence regarding the pressures faced by the beleaguered staff in the Department of Work and Pensions is coming to fruition. Because I placed a parliamentary question which, during this debate, I got the answer to. And I asked a simple question: how many workers in the Department of Work and Pensions are currently dealing with the National Tier Telephony Service? I was advised that there are 400 DWP staff now dealing with phone calls. And to put that into perspective, Madam Deputy Speaker, according to parliamentary answers, there are 4,504 DWP staff chasing social security fraud. That's an unbelievable comparison. And what we're seeing as the reality is DWP staff telling us that they're having to deal with so many telephone calls from claimants that they're unable to process online journals. And what does that mean? I will in a second. And what does that mean? That means that the online journals not being processed means payment delays, rising food bank use, and more people get into poverty. And I'll give way to the honourable member for Stirling.
The honourable gentleman for giving way. And I recognise the passion with which he approaches this subject, but perhaps he can enlighten the House as to why it is that so long after it was agreed that social security powers would go to the Scottish Parliament and to the Scottish Government, why is it taking so long for the SNP Scottish Government to get to grips with the issues of social security as they are going to be devolved to Edinburgh?
I've just given some examples of how broken the UK social security system is. If he seriously believes that any devolved government could address the mess of the social security system that the UK has left in within weeks, then he's kidding himself on, and I'll give way to my honourable friend.
From Stirling, when he says that, he's clearly unaware that he's got 4,000 people to 400 chasing rather than helping. And I heard Gaelic raise its name here today. And he should know that the word Tory comes from the Irish Gaelic, to Irintor, pursuers. And that's what they're doing in the DWP, pursuing people mercilessly rather than helping them, as the honourable gentleman pointed out.
My honourable friend is quite right in what he says. And you know, honourable members opposite try and divide people on the basis that they're for aspiration and the rest of us aren't. That they're for aspiration. That there is, according to the Conservative Party, Madam Deputy Speaker, the undeserving and the deserving poor. No one deserves to be poor in this country, and that should always be the case, and I'll give way to the...
Thank you, honourable gentleman. I held a debate recently, Madam Deputy Speaker, in Westminster Hall about split payments, and I asked the Minister answering what support was going to the Scottish Government, what money was behind it to help create a different system in Scotland, and I'm yet to receive an answer. I also asked the Treasury how they define austerity, and they could not give me an answer. What does the honourable gentleman think about that?
Well, I thank the honourable member for Midlothian with that, because I think the point was well made. I was at the Westminster Hall debate she secured, and it was an excellent speech that she gave, and why we need split payments in terms of universal credit. And the reality is that Scottish Government want to do split payments, but the Department of Work and Pensions are trying their best not to do that, despite the Select Committee, of which I'm a member, telling them that they should engage positively with the Scottish Government and perhaps use what's happening in Scotland as a pilot to roll out across the UK, because the real issue of individuals who are subjected to domestic abuse and going through the universal credit payments, the universal credit system without split payments, I think there's a very real fear that the honourable member for Midlothian and I would have that the domestic abuse would be worse. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, we've heard warm words. We've heard warm words about rising wages from the government benches, but no mention whatsoever that there are 4 million people in insecure work. And as we've heard in relation to the debate today, complete silence in relation to the Taylor Review and what measures the government are going to introduce as a result of that, because the reality is that low pay and poorer living standards are on the rise. There are 400 people, as I said earlier, who are now dealing with telephone calls in the Department of Work and Pensions, 4,504 chasing DWP social security fraud, 400 across the UK employed by the National Minimum Wage Compliance Unit. How are we going to chase these rogue employers if there is only 400 staff chasing compliance of the national minimum wage? Which brings us nicely, Madam Deputy Speaker, to the issue of public sector pay and whether there is a public sector pay cap. Earlier I made an intervention on the Minister. I didn't really get an answer, and I don't think anyone who has raised this in the last few weeks has got an answer, because I believe the reality is that the public sector pay cap across UK government departments is still in place. Why is it still in place? Because we now know under freedom of information that the departmental permanent secretaries got together in February of this year and agreed a joint position across the whole of the UK government departments of a pay rise of 1 to 1.5% for public sector workers. Now, I found that extraordinary, Madam Deputy Speaker, because there are 200 separate pay negotiations across UK government departments. So how about a bit of efficiency in small government from the Conservative benches by reducing the number of pay negotiations from 200? Because it seems to me if the departmental permanent secretaries can agree one negotiation, then surely there could be one negotiation with the trade unions. Now, the Scottish Conservative benches have made a number of interesting observations, shall we say, today. I was particularly interested in this elaborate tax avoidance scheme that was getting suggested to us by the honourable member for Gordon, that if you're a higher rate taxpayer in Scotland, you should consider registering yourself somewhere in the United Kingdom. That's tax avoidance by any description. And then when they talked about, Madam Deputy Speaker, they talked about...
Of order, Mr Kerr.
Madam Deputy Speaker, the honourable gentleman is making comment on the speech that was given by my honourable friend, the member for Gordon, and he is being reported as having said something by the Speaker, currently speaking, that he did not say, and therefore he should not be permitted. How can that be corrected?
No. Order. I appreciate the honourable gentleman's point, but it's a point of debate, not a point of order for the chair. It is, I'm very glad to tell the House, not my responsibility to adjudicate between members who sit there and members who sit there on particular points of fact. And the honourable gentleman is in order in the eloquent speech he's making. Chris Stevens.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I will allow honourable members to read Hansard tomorrow and they can come to their own conclusions. But Scottish Conservatives were complaining earlier on about office closures. I found that fascinating from a political party who's put a meat cleaver to the Job Centre network and a meat cleaver to HMRC office closures across the UK. You really could not make it up. I'll give way to an honourable friend.
Absolutely fascinated by the point that he raised, that the Conservatives called for the richest to relocate their tax matters to England to avoid tax. It would be strange. It would be logical if they would continue this and say that those earning less than 33,000 in England should be registering themselves in Scotland, because we know that the many get the deal in Scotland, but it's a few that they speak for as ever.
Yeah. Well, my honourable friend makes a fascinating observation, but I think you will be disappointed in the response from the Scottish Conservatives. It won't be in the crib sheet, Madam Deputy Speaker, so I'm sure they won't agree. So, Madam, I'll give way to the honourable member for Stirling. I certainly will.
Thank the honourable gentleman for giving way again to make clear, Madam Deputy Speaker, that my honourable friend, the member for Gordon, did not ever at any time suggest that Scottish taxpayers should relocate. He was simply pointing out that... He was simply pointing out the consequences that might flow from the growing tax gap between Scotland and the rest of the United Kingdom.
I'm not necessarily sure that was an intervention or a point of order, Madam Deputy Speaker. Suffice to say that once again I will say I'll allow honourable members across the House to read Hansard tomorrow morning and they can reach their own conclusions. Madam Deputy Speaker, I think that what is missing in this bill most of all, and was missing from the budget, was in this year, the centenary of the women's vote, that there was nothing for women born in the 1950s. That it was a disgraceful omission, and I am delighted that the Department of Work and Pension Select Committee have agreed to my suggestion to hold an inquiry so we can get to the bottom of helping women born in the 1950s to get justice and to get their pensions and to get compensation. Madam Deputy Speaker, we were told austerity is over. It's not. We're then told it's coming to an end, and it's not. But for the poorest and most vulnerable in our society, who have had to pay the price of austerity, austerity must end, and this is why I will not be supporting a second reading for this finance bill. Yeah.